Hello, I want to play you a video from Nadine Dorries. Now, so often I'm deeply scathing about Nadine, and I think rightly so. Uh, in this particular instance, she did an interview on Talk TV with Chris Williamson, who's a former Labour MP, and she cut the interview short. What's interesting here is what her other guests have to say because they were so bang on. And do listen to this to the end to get those other guests. Chris Williamson is a plonker, and he doesn't quite know what he's talking about. And his reference to his vague reference to the New York Times is put in context very well by Nadine Dorris's other guest. But there is a problem. There is a problem that was exposed in the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, and for whatever well-intentioned arguments, the rhetoric has got carried away. And however much Hamas may see themselves as freedom fighters, their act on October the 7th was an act of barbarity. And the photographs and the videos that they took of that barbarity demonstrate that. The idea that they are escaping a prison, and this was a prison break moment, is nonsensical. And the conflation of the idea of Israel and Zionism and Zionist propaganda and that sort of thing is almost as heinous as the conflation of the inability to distinguish between all Jews and all Israelis, or between Jews and Israeli policy. It is possible, as the guest points out, to support Jews and to be critical of Israel. It's possible to be critical of Israel and not to be anti-Semitic. I'm afraid Chris Williamson and Azar Ali stepped over the line. I think Chris Williams doesn't quite, but he comes so close to it. It's frightening. And the point is, he doesn't seem to be able to see the issue. To say that Israel was founded on terrorism, I've made the point myself many times. I'm not a fan of Menachem Begin, and he was certainly a terrorist leader. And that terrorism was, of course, in part directed against Britain. But Israel was founded by the UN, on a UN charter. Israel was recognized by the UN. That makes it very different. So although there was a terrorist element involved in the establishment of Israel, it's very different to what Hamas is doing. And there are good reasons and good historical reasons, I think, to applaud the Zionist effort. And Israel is not solely a Zionist state. There's an indigenous Jewish community there that is supported, whether it likes it or not, by the Israeli state. And there's also a sizable Arab community and a Christian community in Israel, supported by the state. So to conflate Zionism and Israel today is to misjudge the country in a particularly bad way. I think Netanyahu's aims and initiatives are deeply wrong and speared forward a lot by his family experience and the experience of losing his brother. And yes, I think he's filled with bellicosity and hatred, and he's certainly not somebody I would have on my wish list as a guest, except to talk him out of further aggression in the Gaza Strip. Do I think that he's involved in a genocide? No. A genocide is very specific. And if you want to talk about genocide, then I suggest you go to Turkey and you talk to the Turkish president about the supposed genocide of Armenia. And at that point, the Turkish president will advance some very strong arguments against the claim that the attack on Armenians at the end of the First World War was a genocide. And those same arguments, I think, can be advanced to defend Israel at this moment. Is it an atrocity? Utterly. Is it a genocide? No. But is it an atrocity? Absolutely. Is it something that should never have happened? Absolutely. Is it something that could have been avoided? Yes, I think so. And I've explained how on a number of occasions. And as I say, I think given the fact that I'm so often very rude about Nadine Dorries, I think it's important to give her time here. I think she doesn't conduct the interview as well as she could, and I think Chris Williamson is somebody that maybe should have been picked apart. I think his argument should have been picked apart analytically, and Nadine Dorries isn't the person to do that. And I do dislike the way she talks over people and assumes that she is the person we want to listen to, which she does to her guests. But that's an interesting little moment. But that's Nadine. And in this case, I think she's right to stop the interview. As I would have liked a little bit more analysis. And Chris Williamson is he's not very well prepared. Let's just say that he's not well prepared, and he relies on his slogans, and his slogans don't do him any favors. But listen to what he's got to say.
Keir Starmer is facing a second anti-Semitism row after he was forced to suspend another parliamentary candidate. Joining me now is Chris Williamson, former Labour MP, who was blocked from standing as a candidate under Jeremy Corbyn because of accusations of anti-Semitism. Has Sir Keir Starmer changed the party? Hello, Chris. Nice to see you.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi. So, Chris, what is going on? Do you agree with, I mean, it's good that Azir Ali made an apology. Do you agree with that apology that he made for his comments?
Well, I don't think he should have made an apology, Nadine, because what he said was not anti-Semitic. What we've got is a situation now where the Labour Party is in a complete shambles. I mean, Sir Keir Starmer's led the party
Hang on, whoa. Sorry, got to stop you. You've just said his comments weren't anti-Semitic. He espoused a conspiracy theory that...
Well, it's a conspiracy theory that's been, as you say, a conspiracy theory, but it's a proposition that's been carried by many mainstream media outlets. I mean, there has been speculation. It's not speculation that I agree with. I think it was wrong, but it's not anti-Semitic. And what we're seeing here as again is the conflation of opposition and criticism to Israel, criticism of Zionism, with anti-Semitism.
I'm sorry. You've made a really fundamental point that we have to challenge. You are saying that Israel allowed the slaughter, the rape, the beheadings of 1,200 of their own civilians to give them an excuse to go into Gaza. No,
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, Nadine. What I'm saying is that I don't agree with that proposition that's been put forward, but it's not anti-Semitic.
You just said that it's a proposition being espoused by mainstream outlets, which I've not heard. Name one mainstream outlet that is running with that theory for why we are in the situation that we're in now with Israel and Gaza.
I think it's been carried in the New York Times for one, as far as I'm aware. But the point is, Nadine, that criticism of Israel or espousing a theory like that doesn't equate to anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is hatred and bigotry against Jews. Israel is a Zionist entity that is engaged in a genocide, and we should be absolutely
And what were
criticising
Hamas
and
doing?
holding them to account.
And what were
Well,
Hamas
look, I mean,
doing when they crossed?
Israel was
Because
established
you're quick to talk about what Israel's doing. What were Hamas doing when they crossed the borders into Israel and beheaded babies in their cots? What were they doing? What was
Well,
that?
that's not true, Nadine. And there's been no evidence for that at all. And indeed, actually, quite the contrary. I mean, the people that made those allegations have recanted and said that, that it wasn't true. So, the allegations of rape and beheading of babies is simply, Zionist propaganda. It's nonsense. It's not true. I mean, why was the prison break out? I mean, let's remember that Gaza is a concentration camp. It's been sealed off for 17 odd years now, since 2007.
You're calling Gaza a concentration camp?
Absolutely, yes, of course it is, because people are penned in there. I mean, they can't leave. Anything that can go in.
That's not the definition of a concentration camp. That's not the definition of a concentration camp. They're being held. They're being held there. People in Gaza, Gazan civilians, are being held there because they are being used as human shields by Hamas.
No, that's just nonsense, Nadine. I'm sorry, it's more Zionist propaganda. The truth is that the Gaza Strip has been sealed off, and
people could move to North Rafah, but they aren't because Hamas aren't allowing them to.
Well, look, I mean, Israel
the
was
IDF
established.
are asking them to move to North Rafah, and people can't because the Hamas are not allowing them to move because they want to keep them in South Rafah because they want to use them as human shields.
Israel is engaged in a genocide. They've murdered, getting on for 30,000 people. Over 10,000 children have been killed by these Zionist terrorists, which is what the Israeli occupation force actually is.
What are Hamas? What would you do? How do you describe them?
You talk about Hamas, but it's the entirety.
Will you say to me now, Hamas are terrorists? Are Hamas terrorists, Chris?
You always put this question out in the media. It's very odd. Look, Israel was established 75 years ago.
You just called Israel terrorist.
Israel emerged out of terrorism. Let's remember.
So, Chris, tell me, no, I've got to nail you on this, Chris. If you're going to say that Israelis and the IDF are terrorists, what are Hamas? Tell me. Give them the word you used to describe them.
The Palestinian resistance fighters. That's what Hamas and Islamic Jihad and
you won't call them terrorists.
The liberation of Palestine. But look, you have to put this into context. Israel has been occupying Palestine for 75 years. They've been imposing terrorist tactics, actually, an apartheid system, which they've imposed on the Palestinian people, created on land. I mean, as a result of a massacre, let's remember, that 750,000 Palestinians were
I'm sorry, Chris.
From their home in 1948
Chris,
in the Nakba.
If you can't call Hamas terrorist, I can't talk to you. Cut the interview.
Fine. Goodbye.
Thank you, Chris Williamson. Matthew Stadlin and Madeleine Grant are still with me. I find that utterly unbelievable.
Well, it's not surprising. I memean, the man has a track record. In the autumn, he tweeted that Israel had forfeited its right to exist. It's chilling. It's chilling.
So, my earlier point, there's something really dark happening at the moment. University campuses, inside a Sainsbury's supermarket the other day, inside a Soho theatre, on our streets, outside MPs' homes. And we have someone who's a former Labour MP, I don't even know if he's still a member of the Labour Party, who's refusing to call Hamas terrorists.
No, he was suspended. I think we need to be clear about that. He was suspended by Labour, and Chris Williamson is...
He's suspended, isn't it?
Chris Williamson, one of the reasons why I couldn't vote for the Labour Party when Jeremy Corbyn was leader. It is true, of course, that we can criticise, anyone can criticise Israel without being anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
The question is, what motivates, and I'm not pointing the finger at him, I thought his failure to call Hamas terrorists was utterly contemptible and disgraceful. I'm not levelling specific allegations against him. I'm talking more generally. If someone is critical of Israel, they may use Israel as a means to vent their anti-Semitism. But someone like me, with Jewish heritage, is highly critical of what Israel is doing in Gaza. But I can tell you right away that what Hamas did were acts of, I've described them as medieval barbarity because of the methods used, the images that were coming out. They were acts of deep evil. And if there is someone who is so caught up on one side that they cannot see that what Hamas did was way beyond any sort of pale, then they've got serious issues.
I know people are going to say, oh, you couldn't debate with him, you know, you should have allowed him to have his word. But honestly, you can't have it. It's a bit like you can't negotiate with or debate with Hamas because their abiding principles, they just want to... Let me finish speaking, please, Matthew. Their abiding principle is that they just want Israel wiped off the face of the earth. The same with people like Chris Williamson, who refuses to acknowledge, he speaks in kind of like forked tongue, doesn't he, you know?
And the former Labour leader himself, Corbyn, was sitting probably in this studio itself. How many times did Piers Morgan have to ask him whether he would call Hamas terrorists?
Can I just push back on one specific thing that he said? Because, I mean, obviously there's an awful lot to push back on in what Chris Williamson was saying. But that point that he said about how it was widely reported in the media that they had...
I think it was the New York Times.
But that's not what... This is an important thing to clear up. In these articles, they were not arguing that they had deliberately ignored. They were saying that there had been perhaps some intelligence that they hadn't paid close enough attention to before the massacre. That is worlds away from deliberately choosing to ignore it and therefore using that as a pretext to invade Gaza. So it's one of these things that's really important. Sometimes with these conspiracies, they're playing on something that there may be like a tiny grain of truth, and then they use that to extrapolate something that's so disgusting.
That's absolutely spot on.
It is, Madeleine, a really good analysis of that point. And Madeleine, it's the reason why in these very dark days that we're living,
there we are.
journalists need to be really as
Nadine
careful with
Dorries,
their words as anybody
and
does and what they report.
I just thought this adds some sort of redress and establishes that I take her seriously when she needs to be taken seriously. But in this case, of course, it is her guests who are the most interesting part. But thank you, Nadine.